A big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video.
So in this video, I want to talk about my experience with a 100-400 Nikon Z lens, and actually on the Z9 body, which is what I took with me to Antarctica, and I have to say, it was pretty spectacular. I hadn't realised, but I used it for 70% of my shots. And I'm going to go through the things that I found good, the things that I found not so good, and show you some of the amazing landscapes that I took, like these. So morning everybody, fantastic to see you all again. Managed to make a Sunday video. My knee is a little bit less sore. I can actually walk very tentatively on it. I'm still waiting for an MRI scan on it though. It's tricky with an MRI scan with me because I've got a pacemaker. I'm just like a wreck, basically. And because I've got a pacemaker, it makes an MRI scan really difficult. It is MRI safe, but they've got to have a cardiology team, so it means that I'm just waiting for this MRI scan. I've been to see a surgeon. They think I've torn my ACL, completely ruptured my ACL, and maybe torn my MCL, and maybe hurt the meniscus of my knee. So it's not great, but it may be that when we have the MRI that we don't see any of that. Anyway, that's all boring. Let's get back to Antarctica and some of the amazing shots that I took with this setup. So it's really interesting actually, because getting to Antarctica was much more difficult than I thought it was going to be. Obviously we had COVID, Antarctica is quite a long way away. And in fact, I don't think you can go any further unless you go to Australia from the UK. But we started off with probably what the worst thing to happen possible, which was Mass, Peter Everson, who was one of the workshop attendees, one of the people that started doing this Antarctica workshop with myself and James, got COVID at Santiago airport and he was stuck in the hotel. So that was not good. But we cracked on and it was a fairly long trip, ultimately leading to a fly-in to Antarctica and landing on this strip that you can see here. And it was pretty spectacular, I have to say. You really got goosebumps landing there. It was an army base. I think it was the Chilean and the Russian army base. So we had to walk down there, get into the Zodiacs and go to the ship. And then shooting predominantly was from the ship, from the Zodiacs, and a little bit from land. So we didn't actually manage to get on land that much because there's a restriction. ASOC, which is the Antarctic Southern Ocean Coalition, restrict how much time you can get on land, which is a good thing. You're there to try and protect the land. And there's so many things that you do when you go to Antarctica to try and protect things. So you go through a mud room where you go through different disinfectants to make sure you don't bring disinfectant onto Antarctica and then take it off Antarctica and take it to another part of Antarctica. Our bags are checked to make sure there's no seeds in them, so we don't want anything landing on there or one of the birds, penguins or whatever, picking those up. So it's really carefully controlled, which is fantastic. But what it means is that you're shooting from Zodiacs, the ship, more than you're shooting from land. And that means that this lens came into its own because you're trying to pick out details in the landscape, like this shot here. We first landed on this active volcano called Deception Island. It felt a little bit like a James Bond movie where you're going into this volcano. And it was really weird because it was like warm to touch. It's the first time on shore photographing them. There's some penguins over here that are, you can probably just see them, just little in the scene, and I just like them against the black volcanic sand. We're in the middle of a volcano and literally there's warmth coming off. I'm really warm in Antarctica, it's crazy, it's really crazy. But these penguins are just amazing. They just look so funny when they walk. It doesn't get better than this. It really never can get better than this. So I've got my Z9, my 100-400mm lens, and I'm trying to just sort of pick them out. There was 3 of them just equally spaced, and just try and think of a nice composition when they're spaced over there. And next week, in my video next week, I'm going to talk all about how I shot the wildlife on Antarctica and how I tried to interpret it in terms of the landscapes of Antarctica. I didn't want to just go and shoot portraits of the wildlife, and I'm going to talk about that in detail in next week's video. But yeah, I took these penguins, and I probably spent too much time taking penguins there because we saw thousands of penguins on the trip, and I was just excited about these 4. They looked like we were going down to the pub. We also managed to get a few shots from the Zodiacs, and again, pretty much all the time I was shooting with the 100 to 400. I had to be super careful about shutter speeds with it. Obviously, when you're on a Zodiac and bumping up and down, like you can see here, it's difficult. It's difficult to try and find a composition. You're never in one place for very long, and you're trying to avoid people and avoid the bumpiness of the ride as well. So I was sort of shooting at 1/2 times the focal length, even though with the inbuilt stabilization in this and the Z9, you should be able to shoot much faster, much slower than that. I found that if I was shooting at 400mm, I needed to be at least a 1/800 of a second shutter speed. Anyway, I got some more penguins from the Zodiacs, and then we got to Antarctica proper. I would say, actually, when we left Deception Island, it was the strongest winds I've ever seen. They just went boom like that, and the weather just changed. And that was the case across Antarctica. The weather would change so quickly. We got the Zodiacs back to the ship, and then we were on to Antarctica proper and the icebergs. I've not been to Greenland, so I've not seen a huge amount of icebergs. I've seen the ones that come out of the glacier in Iceland, but I've not seen the massive icebergs that you get in Antarctica and Greenland, and it was super special, and it led to some really amazing photos. I'm going to get onto some of them in a minute, but I just want to show you this iceberg. So, we were shooting from the ship. You just had to be on the ship, looking around all the time and trying to find out what we could pick out. And this storm brewed, and it was really amazing, and the dark clouds. And it was just a case of trying to find an iceberg that was really interesting going past and trying to pick it out. And having that extra reach really helped. So you can see in this iceberg here, just be able to reach in and pick out the detail, like this little bridge had been formed, made a really big difference. I think this was shot around about 380mm, whereas the one previous was about 200mm. So having that extra length to be able to pick out details really made a big difference. A quick tip, one thing I would say is, quite often when I'm doing shooting around sea or in sort of harsh conditions, I would put the flare cap on to stop any water going on the lens. What I found was when it was windy, when I was holding the camera up, if you had that on, it was a bit like a sail. It sort of grabbed the wind, and it was more difficult to hold the camera steady. So I took that off and just cleaned my lens more. When it wasn't windy, it was fine, but if it was windy, you really couldn't shoot with that on. So that's the top tip. If you're ever shooting wind with a longer lens, just think about that. And one thing that was really interesting was how dynamic the landscape was. We heard very often the glaciers coming down and then shearing off into the ocean, and they made such a tremendous noise. Obviously, once you'd seen the noise, the event had happened. So I didn't actually catch one on camera shearing off, but I did catch a sort of mini avalanche coming down the cliff that you can see in this shot here. And again, that was really beneficial by having the Z9 and the Z7. So what I did was I put the 100 to 400 on my Z9. It just stayed on my Z9. I don't think I ever took it off my Z9. And then on my Z7, that's where I changed lenses. Predominantly, 90% of the time, I had the 24 to 120 on there. And then occasionally I went for the super wide angle lens, but I probably only took, 1% of my shots on anything wider than 24mm, which was a slight disappointment. If I went back, I think I'll probably try and get some more like that. But with not being on land that much, shooting from the Zodiacs being really difficult at wide angles, then it was difficult. So after the storm, we had this amazing change in weather, and it was just like the sun came out and we had this beautiful mist, and we had that quite a few days actually, and the weather just changed so dramatically just like that. And I was actually with a group of workshop attendees, and we were looking over to this mountain, which was just revealing itself in the distance. And James said, "Wouldn't it be good if there was just a little person hiking up the mountain here?" And then he said, like that. And there was somebody hiking. So I managed to get this shot, which was just so lucky. I think James might have got a better one where there was more on the ridge, but yeah, and again, that was just because I had this camera to hand. Okay, let's have a look at some prints that I've done. I printed out a few images. I just wanted to talk about these prints, talk about some of the compositional sort of decisions that I made with these prints. And then just over there, you can just see, that is a Pano that I did that is 2 meters long, and it was taken around about 200 millimeters, and I just did a massive Pano on this beautiful morning, so I'm going to show you that as well. So the same day that I shot that image with the man who's hiking on the glacier there, I took this shot as well. So this was taken, I put the details up here, with the 100 to 400, and what I really liked about this was the contrast between this really sort of jagged line here and the snow just coming over the top. Obviously the wind's coming from this direction, and this really sort of straight line of this area of snow here that led into the sea. And I just feel like it's a really nice, simple, graphical image of the mountains that I didn't really expect to see in Antarctica. You know, some of these mountains were 2,000–3,000 meters tall. They were absolutely massive on the Antarctic Peninsula, and they looked really, really fantastic. So I really like that. And then I shot this image at 400 millimeters. So this is an image of another ship that was sailing through this area here. It was just outside the Le Maire Strait, I think. And we were going through all these icebergs. It was really, really exciting. And we saw the ship in the distance. And before we saw this ship, all this was cloudy, and then suddenly the cloud revealed, and it was one of those times when you're thinking, is that mountain or is it cloud? And the mountain just sort of revealed itself. And this is where a 400 millimeter lens comes into its own, really, because I managed to just give this almost like cinematic feel to this shot, with this huge boat and then these massive mountains in the background through this sea of icebergs, which was just so fantastic. And then that, you know, that compression of perspective is just fantastic as well. The one thing that's really interesting on this is that if I just zoom in closer, maybe I'll have to go to the digital image, but you go to the boat here, and there's actually refraction of the light, and I presume that's caused from a temperature gradient from the sea up to the air, which is causing different density of air, and then we're getting refraction. It's a bit like heat haze. Heat haze is just a temperature gradient, basically. But you don't expect to see that on a shot like this. I was first thought, oh, the lens is a bit soft, but it's definitely refraction of light through a temperature gradient. So that's really interesting. I really like that shot. A lot of people ask how cold it is in Antarctica, and it's funny because it isn't super cold in the summer. We were there in the summer, and it can get cold, but you know, the typical temperatures we were having were around about 1 to sort of -2, -3. It was colder in the evening, obviously, but we were obviously on the ocean as well. When you get onto the actual mainland itself, then that's when the temperatures start to drop quite significantly. But the battery on the Z9 actually worked really well. I was a bit worried because I had just one battery, and I said to Nikon, you've lent me this camera, I've only got one battery, I'm really worried that it's going to run out. But I only got down to 50%, and I used it all day, every day, and I never charged it in the day, and the lowest it got was 50%, so it was totally fine. This was a quite a nice image. Whenever I'm shooting images, I'm always looking for the simplest type of image that I can get out. I like these simplistic landscapes. I wanted to use the sky here to give it an extra sense of drama, of vastness, of remoteness, and I feel like this has worked really well. We've got this mountain peak in the background, and then you can just see this crevasse just going through here. Wouldn't it have been great if this man would have walked over this ridge here? But I really like this. This works really well as an image. Probably one of my favourite simplistic landscape photos that I've taken for a while. And then talking about simplistic, we had a morning that was fantastic, and I'll show you some of the footage and some of the images in a second. Before I do that, I just want to show you this shot. So this iceberg just emerged out of the fog. It was so incredible, and this iceberg is huge. It's probably, I guess, probably 60–70 meters tall, and maybe I don't know, 400, 500, 600 meters long. It was such a massive iceberg, and it was just emerged from the fog. It was really, really spectacular. And again, just being able to pick that out with the long lens was what it was all about. In a way, it's very different to my type of photography where I'm looking for foregrounds, looking to connect everything together. In this, you're just looking for little windows of photos within the environment. And what I found worked best was just to stand back a little bit. You had to be reactionary, but you didn't want to just snap, 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 snap. You just needed to just look at the environment, see what was happening, and then try and predict the shot. And that's where I found that it worked best. So yeah, I got this shot. I just want to show you some footage now of what was such an incredible morning that just happened just a little bit before I got this shot, and it really was a beautiful sunrise. So, from that sunrise, can you see that okay? This is, I don't think my arm span's big enough. So, right, don't break your knee again, Nigel. I can't get this flat enough, but you get the idea. This is a really big pano that I took, it's really hard to do when it's, there we go. So, from that sunrise, I managed to get this amazing pano. So this is a 350 megapixel pano that I've printed 2 meters wide and about sort of 70 centimeters tall. And it really, really is spectacular. It really gives the impression of what it was like in Antarctica on that morning. I'm really pleased with this as well. I'm going to be offering this on my website, so hopefully it'll be up by the time this video goes live, but if not, it'll be the video next week. I also want to show a few more images, so let me just put this back and I'll be there in a second. I've got to be careful of my knee. Yeah, so that pano was pretty spectacular. And that morning was pretty spectacular as well. I got quite a lot of images, as you saw at the end of that little bit of B-roll there. You saw some of the images that I took. One of my favorites was just prior to the sunrise actually happening, which is often the case. And especially when you get to the poles, you find that that blue hour, especially in the morning, is so spectacular and lasts for so long. So if sunrise is at 5 a.m, you need to be getting up at 3:30, 4 a.m. to be able to get it. And I got some pretty amazing shots. One of my favorites was actually a shot of a whale. We had a lot of whales, a few breaching, a lot of them just diving down for food and showing their tails, which was just so spectacular to see. Mostly humpback whales, but we saw a few other types of whales as well. I'm going to talk more about shooting those whales, shooting the orcas and the penguins and the seals next week, but I did want to show you this shot because I felt it was a good landscape shot as well, and probably one of the best I got of the whale tails, which were again quite difficult to shoot. It was really interesting actually, trying to predict the weather and especially the wind. And the ship was run by a captain, and then there was an expedition leader that worked with the captain to work out where we were going to go. And they based that based on wind. They wanted to go to the places where the lowest wind were, because for safety and obviously comfort of the passengers. And that was great from a photography point of view, because that's where we wanted to go as well. But what it meant was that we were going through lots of different weather systems, and we managed to get shots like this where, you know, there was a storm we'd gone through, and then we got a little bit of light, and then we got these icebergs, and the colours were incredible. And again, shooting with the 100 to 400 was just so spectacular because you could pick out those icebergs. And believe me, that this isn't edited very much. You know, this is this iceberg was that blue against the orange. It really was incredible to see. Really spectacular. So a lot of people asked, when I was doing the trip, what weather systems we used to be able to predict the weather. Well, we asked the captain this, and he used Windy. So the app Windy is what he used to get across the Drake Passage as well and plan the route across the Drake Passage. So Windy is a good app if you're trying to plan wind, and it's also good for other things as well. I'll put a link to it in the description below. So finally, I just want to talk about a few abstracts. The other thing that's really good with a long lens like this is being able to pick out details in the landscape, and there's a lot of abstracts. And it's one of the sort of regrets that I had when I came back, thinking that I should have taken more abstracts. I think I probably got about 4 or 5 abstracts of some of the icebergs, like this shot here, which I've edited. I've not edited the others yet, but I wish I got more, and that makes me really want to go back and really concentrate a little bit more on the abstracts within the icebergs, because I feel like there's just so many phenomenal shots there. And also it allowed you to pick out the abstracts in the water, the waves, like this shot as we were going across the Drake Passage. Again, I was using this to try and capture the drama of the waves as they crashed against the bow of the boat and then bounced off. All those sort of things were really good using a long lens, and it was so exciting in Antarctica to be able to do all these things. I just had to pinch myself all the time. So I have had quite a lot of questions about whether I'm going to be doing this again. Well, we're definitely going to be doing it again, probably in 2 years' time. So in 2024. There's going to be a link below to sign up and just show an interest in it, so that we've got an idea of how many people are interested in going, and then we can decide whether we try and get a whole boat to ourselves or do it like we did this time where we had half the boat. So there's a link below if you're interested in the trip that we will be doing in 2024, and I'll probably announce that in the next few months as well, so you'll start to be able to book on it. So before I leave you with some B-roll of the penguins from next week, and I've got a lot of it. I shot all that, by the way, on the Z9. I shot everything in 4K 120 frames per second, which I'm so pleased I did, because I've got so much slow-mo of the animals, which looks really good. I'm going to show you that in a minute. Before I do that, I just want to thank today's sponsor, which is Squarespace. And do you know Squarespace? They are what allows me to run my business, to share all my photos with you, to set up my portfolio, and to build my website. And it's super easy to do things. And in fact, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go and add some of these images onto my homepage so that you can see the images in a carousel. And I'm also going to set up a blog this week and next week, so you should be able to see that next week. But Squarespace means that it's super easy for me to do it. And if I want to set up a store, or I want to set up a blog, or I want to set up a newsletter, anything like that, I can do with Squarespace. So if you're interested in setting up a website, then make sure you take a look at squarespace.com/Nigel to get 10% off. Okay, thanks ever so much for watching, and until next Sunday, and penguins, bye.